Star Wars: The Bad Batch is the newest animated show in the Star Wars universe, and it takes place directly after the events of Revenge of the Sith, where Clone Force 99 navigates the dangers of the galaxy after defying a quickly rising empire while also witnessing the systematic elimination of the clone army. Now, of course, the show follows Clone Force 99, or the Bad Batch, which is a group of genetically altered clones. So they're a specialized force, and they consist of the characters Hunter, Wrecker, Echo, Tech, and Crosshairs. Now, the Bad Batch was originally introduced in Season 7 of the Clone Wars, and the first little arc they had for that season. And that was to kind of like help with this be an actual spin-off from the Clone Wars, of course. And with having their own show now, their characterization is done much better than it was in their introduction, because when they were in those couple episodes of the Clone Wars, I thought the characters came off as kind of flat and generic. I wasn't a huge fan of them. I thought they were fine. But the fact that they were getting their own show, I didn't really care for at the time, just because they didn't do a whole lot in those couple episodes to emotionally connect the audience with those characters. However, I, of course, was interested in watching this show when it came out because I enjoy watching Star Wars, and I like Dave Filoni and his take on the animated shows especially. And in my opinion, the show is pretty solid overall. I think it's a pretty fun addition to the likes of like the Clone Wars and Rebels, and kind of being a bridge between those in some ways. Now, to review this the way I want to review it, I will be spoiling most of the first episode of the show, because that sets up what the general premise for the entire season is, and it's kind of hard not to be able to talk about kind of what the story is trying to do. So the show starts with the Bad Batch on a mission, and they witness Order 66 happening, which of course was used to eliminate all the Jedis. And after that, they go back to Kamino because the Clone War is technically over. And when they get back to Kamino, they see that now an empire has been installed as the galactic overall government. And in this time, when they go back to Kamino, they meet Omega, which is a young girl who is actually the only female clone made from Jango Fett's DNA, because all the rest of the clones are all male. She's the only female clone, and she also ages slower in the same way that Boba Fett does. The Bad Batch is then sent on a mission, and they find out that the moral requirements of that mission does not align with anything that they've done before, and is asking too much for them to do by basically killing rebels and their families. And they refuse to do it. So of course, you can't defy the Empire, so as soon as they go back, they realize that they need to go on the run. So they grab Omega to save her, because she'll be in danger too by the time the Empire's installed everything on Kamino. But Crosshair has a difference of opinion, and he ends up staying behind and actually tries to stop the Bad Batch, because he believes that they should be taking the orders from their commanders. So of course this sets up the story for the rest of the season. The Bad Batch is on the run, and Crosshair is working for the Empire and trying to keep tabs on the Bad Batch whenever he can, which of course calls the loyalty between those characters into question, and what it means to be kind of a family within that clone force. Now, I loved the first episode of this season. Atmospherically, it was done incredibly well. I'd say that like the quality of the very first episode, I'd say, is on the same level that the Siege of Mandalore arc from the last 4 episodes of the Clone Wars was. I think that it's kind of like the best that this animation can be and has been in the Star Wars universe. And it made me really excited for the rest of the show. Unfortunately, that's also to the show's detriment, because the first episode is the best episode in the season. And like I said, the show is solid overall, but probably the biggest problem is that this is a 16 episode season. And while that is kind of more in line with Rebels and the Clone Wars and kind of their longer ordered seasons, I do think this story would have benefited from a shorter season, specifically a 10 episode season. I think it would have been better if they tightened up some of the side stories that they had going on throughout the entire season, because it does feel at certain points like a lot of episodes are just kind of filler. And in my opinion, there's really only like about 5 to 7 episodes within the 16 episodes that really moves the main plot forward of the season. So because it's a serialized overarching story for the entire season, like the way Rebels does, it needs to keep the energy up and stay interesting the entire time. Clone Wars kind of had the benefit of being more of an anthological story setup, where even in like the earliest seasons, like each episode would be a different story, and then they kind of went into like several episode arcs for their later seasons. But this is just one story over the entire season, and it would have benefited from being shorter than it was. And while the episodes that did feel like filler were entertaining enough, they also didn't move the plot forward and didn't really contribute to any character development for the Bad Batch in a bunch of the episodes. And this also plays into not focusing on the characterization of the characters as much as it needed to. The characters, specifically Echo and Tech, are sidelined for basically the entire season. You learn very, very little about them. You don't really get to see them interact very much in any meaningful way with anybody else. So they're kind of one-note characters, which is unusual because the Bad Batch was introduced to help save Echo in Season 7 of the Clone Wars. So you'd kind of assume that he'd have a bigger role in this story, but they really did sideline his character. Now, there was some decent character development for the likes of Hunter and Wrecker, but that was mainly through their relationship with Omega. And this is kind of in the same vein of what Star Wars has been doing lately, as a trend of doing like the lone wolf and the cub type of relationship, where it's like these hardened men taking care of a child. And while Hunter and Wrecker did get some development, I would have wanted to see more from them. A deeper dive into their characters would have been cool. They do a decent job with Crosshair. Even though he's not really involved with the Bad Batch throughout the season, they do bring a very interesting nuance to his character, which I really appreciated. You do end up liking these characters because you spend so much time with them, and they're inherently likable in the first place. But they really didn't receive the same amount of attention when it comes to their characters as someone like Ahsoka did in the final season of the Clone Wars. And another kind of nitpick I have is that the show did something similar to what the second season of The Mandalorian did, and that was bringing in familiar characters just to have them there. And while it is cool to see these characters kind of regardless, and it would make sense for the main characters to run into them somehow, there are some other characters that feel like they are just kind of shoehorned in there for fan service. Especially considering that the setting for these stories is supposed to be an entire galaxy. It feels kind of unlikely that you're running into these same handful of characters from the Clone Wars or Rebels. It's a cool bridge between those shows, but some characters felt a little shoehorned in, kind of like how I wasn't a huge fan of Luke being the Jedi in the second season of The Mandalorian, who comes and gets Grogu. I thought it feels like it's just fan service to be fan service, to have a familiar face pop up. But it's not even really that. It's that when they bring these characters up that have received so much more development in other shows or movies, it does feel like the story's focus shifts to those characters instead of the Bad Batch. So it takes the focus away from the Bad Batch when the focus really should be on them. And that's the issue that's a trend that I hope Star Wars kind of moves away from in like the third season of The Mandalorian, the second season of this show. I hope that they're able to find more independent footing with their main characters and stories, rather than relying on other characters to make an appearance. And then to get past all that negativity, get the stuff that I did like. The animation is great in the show. They seem to be improving it every time they come back to it. That specific type of animation that they used in the Clone Wars is the same one they use in this, of course. And it looks great, especially in comparison to like the first two seasons of the Clone Wars. It's astoundingly different. The voice acting is also great. D. Bradley Baker provides the voices for all of the Bad Batch and all of the clones, and he does a very good job at really making it feel like there are actually separate characters talking to each other rather than just one guy in a sound booth. Michelle Ang is also really good as Omega. She's really entertaining and brings a liveliness to that character. And Omega, as far as like children within Star Wars, is one of the most entertaining and well-written kids in Star Wars. Because child characters especially have been very divisive in Star Wars, to say the least, and they do a very solid job with Omega here. So she's not annoying when she's there, which is always good to see. Now, the episodes about the main story were incredibly entertaining, especially the last 3 episodes of the season. There is a great dynamic introduced between Crosshair and Hunter specifically, giving the show a more mature theme to address and not giving it an easy conclusion, which I did appreciate. The show does dip its toes into darker territory, especially with the Empire's treatment and phasing out of the clone army. I would have liked to have seen it go deeper into the systematic evil behind the Empire with this, but it's probably best not to make it too dark, so it still does appeal to younger kids. There does need to be a balance there, because you can't make this animated show that's generally directed towards a younger audience. You really shouldn't make it really dark, which I can understand why they wouldn't go into like systematic oppression and have that be like the main theme of the show or something like that. But it does still hold on to some of those darker themes within Star Wars, especially this type of story with the clones. I do think that The Bad Batch is a good solid show. I think it would have benefited from a shorter 10-episode season, because the weight of the final couple episodes, which were really good, the weight wasn't as palpable as it really could have been, because it felt like the story got sidelined so many times. And even though it did get sidetracked, I do still think that the overall story worked pretty well. But I do think the very first episode was the best episode. It was fantastic, and I wish that the rest of the season could have stayed on that level. It's good, solid Star Wars content, and I can see some people being into it and a lot of people not being into it. It just really depends on whether or not you want to watch it. If you liked Clone Wars and you liked Rebels, you'll probably like this show too. But I'm going to be rating Season 1 of The Bad Batch an 8.0 out of 10. Now, what did you guys think about it? Are you excited for the next season? Let me know, and I'll be back with another video.